Okay, so we're ready to begin. Okay, so we'll start. We'll do 3 mental bows to the Buddha. Okay, 1, 2, 3. And then I'll do the salutation to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Blessed One, the Worthy One, the fully enlightened one. Okay, and then I will do the sharing of the screen. Let's get rid of some of these unnecessary. Will just share the whole screen. Okay, do you see the screen?
Yes, Bhante, we can see it.
Okay. And so today we'll be continuing with our examination of the Anguttara Nikaya Numerical Discourses of the Buddha, and we're in the Book of Sixes, and we come to Sutta number 63, which has the title Penetrative, a penetrative discourse or exposition of the Dhamma. And I'm being a little sort of pedantic today. What I did is to copy and paste first the Pali version of the sutta in the Pali text, and then I found that there is a counterpart or a parallel to this in the Chinese transmission in the Madhyama Agama, the Zhong Ahan Jing, and it is so that is the counterpart of the Majjhima Nikaya, and that in the Chinese version, it's Sutta number 111, Majjhima Agama 111. And so first, the title of this would have really been I should have brought my extra big screen, my external screen, so I had a big screen. How is the size of the, okay, we'll start with this. Is the size okay?
Yes, we can see it, Bhante.
Yeah, I have it at 140. Let's go up to 150. Okay, so the key word here in the Pali version which gives the title Nibbedika Sutta. And the word Nibbedika, we're going to see that the Buddha places a lot of emphasis on this sutta. He sort of makes it a very important sutta. So the title, comes from the prefixes near plus ved, which I think comes from the verb, wow, I don't remember what the verb, that's right. The verb vijati. Vijati means to pierce. Like when you shoot an arrow and you hit the target, you pierce that target. And so from vijati, we get the verbal root ved, and then it has the prefix near. And then what happens in Pali, when an R and a V meet, they turn into 2 B's. Because it's easier to pronounce than near ved, a little bit difficult. So in Sanskrit, you have nirveda, but in Pali, nibbeda. Just like in Sanskrit, you have nirvana, but in Pali, nibbana. So nibbeda is piercing or penetration, and then the adjective, nibbedika. So the Pali version of the sutta just simply begins with the Buddha saying, Nibbedika pariyayang vo dhamma pariyayang de sami, which we have the English translation, I will teach you a penetrative exposition of the Dhamma. Then listen and pay careful attention. I will speak But the Chinese version, interestingly, let's jump down. Whoops. Okay, so it has something which is not in the Pali. So here the Buddha addresses the monks and he says, I will teach you the Dhamma, he says, which is good in the beginning, good in the middle, good in the end, which has the right phrasing and the right meaning, and which is pure, and which is purified, has purity, and which reveals the spiritual life, the holy life. And this is called the penetrative spiritual practice, you could say, which is able to extinguish the asavas. The asavas are fundamental defilements. So even though we don't find this particular expression in the Pali version of this sutta, I hope I had a note. Yeah, but we do find the same thing in a sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, sutta number 146, where the Buddha says, I will teach you, O monks, the Dhamma which is good in the beginning, good in the middle, good in the end, which has the right meaning and the right phrasing, which is complete and purified, and which reveals the spiritual life. And this is the Chaka Sutta, the sutta on the six sixes. So I think probably the Chinese version compiled, or those who compiled the version that was translated into Chinese included that little phrase or that little sentence in order to sort of underscore the importance of this sutta. And now we come to sort of the themes of the sutta. It's actually a rather complex sutta. And so the Buddha is going to speak first. There will be 6 topics dealt with in this penetrative discourse, 6 main topics, and then each main topic is going to be treated from 6 different points of view. So if you take all of these factors together, 6 main topics, 6 points of view for looking at that topic, we get 36 factors in this sutta. And so here there's a little difference in the organization between the Pali version and the Chinese counterparts. So the Pali version begins with sensual pleasures. First we'll take the 6 main topics: sensual pleasures, then feelings, and third come perceptions, then come the asavas, here translated as taints, then comes karma, and then 6th is dukkha, or suffering. So those are the 6 main topics, and then the 6 standpoints, the 6 standpoints from which each is going to be understood. We could see it, we just have to take the first one. So first we have the main subject itself. In this case, we have sensual pleasures. Okay, there it goes. So that's the main topic. Then we have the second is the source and origin. So for each one, we're going to see the source and origin. Third, we have the diversity, the different sort of aspects of that particular topic, the way it can be divided into a number of different aspects or factors. then we have the result or the fruit of that particular factor. Okay, then we have its cessation, and then we have the way or the path leading to cessation. You just find any seat. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So let us save this. Okay, so yeah, first I just saw that I had a note on the meaning of this word nibbedika or penetrative. So the way the commentary explains it, why is it called penetrative? The commentary says it's penetrative because it penetrates and splits the mass of greed, hatred, and delusion. So destroying greed, hatred, and delusion, that is the attainment of Nibbana. So this is sort of underscored by the Buddha calls this a penetrative exposition of the Dhamma, because it's one, we could say, that destroys, that can lead to the destruction of greed, hatred, and delusion, and thereby to the realization of Nibbana. Okay, so first, the text begins by laying out this kind of broad overview, taking each of the 6 main topics and saying that each of these topics is to be understood by way of its subdivisions. And then after laying out this sort of map of the territory that's to be covered, then the Buddha sort of takes us back to ground level and starts to expound each of these topics. And here we come to an interesting difference. I don't see any reason for it, any rational explanation, between the Pali version and the Chinese version. The Pali version begins with sense pleasures or sensual pleasures, whereas the Chinese parallel begins with the asavas. Yeah, so I put number 4 in here to show that this is the Chinese version corresponding to the Pali. Okay, so let us then go down. Okay, so we start with, well, of course we're following the Pali version. So we start with sensual pleasures. Let's get the English. I'm juggling 3 versions at once, English translation, Pali, and Chinese parallel. So we'll be looking at the English translation. So we have sensual pleasures should be understood, all of these factors. Okay, so now after again repeating the 6 things to be understood, the Buddha says, for what reason is this said? In other words, now he's going to elaborate. And he starts off by speaking about the 5, these are called in Pali kamma guna, which is translated here as the 5 objects of sensual pleasure. So you see the Pali kamma guna, and interestingly, the word guna, usually in Pali, especially a slightly later period, means good qualities. So like speak about somebody who has kindness, compassion, observe precepts, generous. That person has guna, good qualities or virtues. And then the special excellent qualities of the Buddha are called the Buddha guna, the virtues of the Buddha. But for some reason, the word guna in relation to sensual desires comes to mean the objects of sensual desire. And so the Chinese translators use gongda, the word, usually that means that's virtues or good qualities. But these are not good qualities, but these are simple objects, the objects of sensual pleasure, of sensual desire. And so what are those objects of sensual desire? So this is a stock formulation that we find again and again in the suttas. The Buddha speaks about the 5 objects of sensual pleasures, which correspond, or 5 objects of sensual desire, or the five kinds of objective sensual pleasures. And here we have, they correspond to the 5 sense faculties, visible forms cognizable by the eye, sounds cognizable by the ear, odors that are known through the nose, tastes that are known through the tongue, and tactile objects, or maybe we could say textures, that can be known through the body. But to count as sensual pleasures, it's not just enough that they be objects, but they are described as objects, things that are wished for, desired, agreeable, pleasing, connected with sensual pleasure, and tantalizing. So if I'm walking down the street and I see some garbage cans with some mice or rats browsing around the garbage cans, that is not a sensual pleasure cognizable through the eye. Unless I'm at the point of some near starvation, hungry for something, I need something, then I might think of the rats as a potential source of food. And if you hear maybe the sound of construction workers banging away, putting up a building, that would not count as sounds cognizable by the ear that are desired, agreeable, pleasing, connected with sensual pleasure. But these are things which are sort of beautiful, delightful, tantalizing, that naturally arouse sensual desire. But now the Buddha makes an important statement that we don't find this in the Chinese version, but I think this is an important qualification. The text says that these objects of sensual pleasure, he says, these are not sensual pleasures themselves, but in the discipline of the Noble One, these are called objects of sensual pleasure. Let's look at this in the Pali version. I'm sorry, the Pali is actually very simple. So even if you haven't studied Pali, you should be able to follow. Okay, so these are not kamma. Kamma is sensual pleasure. But these are called, in the discipline of the Noble One, Ariyasa Vinaya, these are called kamma guna, objects of sensual pleasure, or we could say sensual objects. So what is sensual pleasure itself? The text says, a person's sensual pleasure is lustful intention. And we look at the Pali. Sankappa rago purisasa kamo. So the word sankappa means intention, motivation, thought, and raga is lust or passion. So the Buddha is identifying kamma with the lust, the thought about sensual pleasures, and the lust for sensual pleasures. Yeah, and then the text cites a verse, and it's an interesting verse. Let's look at the English translation, and then I'll go to the Pali. So the verse says, "These are not sensual pleasures, the pretty things in the world. It's a person's sensual pleasure is lustful intention. The pretty things remain just as they are in the world, but the wise remove the desire for them." In other words, even for an arahat, the arahat will see beautiful sights, can hear beautiful sounds, can smell pleasant fragrances, can eat delicious food, can make contact with soft and agreeable touch sensations or textures. But for the arahat, those are just sensual objects. They're not sensual pleasures, because the real source of what makes them into sensual pleasures is having sankappa rago, that lustful intention. Yeah, the Pali verse is really very nice. Nete kamayani chitrani loke sankappa rago, that's the lustful intention. Purisasa kamo is the sensuality of a person. Titani citrani tateva loke. So the agreeable, the beautiful things, and the word chitra, one of the meanings is like a picture, a beautiful picture. But it can also just mean beautiful, beautiful things. The beautiful things just remain as they are in the world. They don't change, whether it's somebody like who is a famous sensualist, Casanova, or contemporary. Who is one?
Picasso.
Picasso. I guess so, but okay. So whether it's a Casanova or an arahat, the beautiful things are just simply beautiful things. But for the arahat, they remain, whereas for the person like Casanova, the sensualist, they become, because of the sankappa rago, that lustful intentions governed by lust, they become sensual objects, sort of triggers for sensual desire. And so the beautiful things just remain exactly as they are in the world, whether it's for the sensualist or the arahat. But the wise, that's the dhira, the wise, remove vinayanti, the desire, chanda, that's the craving, in regard to them. Okay, so that is the exposition of sensual pleasures or sensuality. Yeah, the Chinese is missing that portion, so the Chinese just says, okay, so how does one know sensuality? And then it says that there are these 5 objects or virtues of sensual desire, that is lovable, delightful, beautiful, of things that are connected with sensual desire, that arouse pleasure. Namely, so what are the 5 forms that can be known through the eye, sounds known through the ear, and so on, down to textures that can be known through the body. So that is how one knows you, that's sensuality. So we don't find that this passage in the Chinese version. Perhaps it was not originally in the Pali transmission, but the verse also occurs in the Samyutta Nikaya, in the first volume in Sutta number 34. So it might have been brought into the Pali version for elaboration. Okay, then we continue. Whoops. Okay, so now we're continuing. So that is the first item under sensuality, the sensual pleasures. And so now the text raises the question, this is the second point of view, the second perspective. What is the source and origin of sensual pleasures? And then the source and origin is contact. Let's see what the note says. Not such a helpful explanation, just coexistent contact. Okay, but the basic point, I think, here is that for sensual desire to arise, since it's now the desire that's being identified with sensual pleasure, there has to be contact. If, say, there's a beautiful girl walking behind me, but I'm looking this way, I don't see her. Maybe she goes out the door and vanishes, and I don't see her. So there's no contact, so no desire or no feeling of sensual desire or sensual pleasure arising through the eye. Of course, there's no contact. If in another building somebody is playing, maybe suppose now in Cold Spring there's a concert, that's a nearby town, there's a concert, a Mozart concert going on, musicians are playing, and I like Mozart's music, but I don't hear it. So there's no contact, so no delight in the music. And if in the kitchen here somebody is preparing delicious food and fragrance of maybe some curries are spreading through the kitchen, or some say through the White House, but I don't smell it, then there's no contact with the fragrance, and so there's no desire arises, no sensual desire for the fragrance. And somebody might be eating a delicious preparation, but it doesn't make any contact with my tongue, so there's no desire for that taste, and so forth. And so in that way, we could say the sensual pleasures, well, the origin of sensual pleasure in the sense of sensual craving is contact. Okay, then we have the diversity of sensual pleasures, which is really the diversity of sensual desire. And so we have the desire for visible forms, desire for sounds, for odors, for tastes, for tactile objects. So this is pretty clear, the diversity of sensual pleasures. Let's just see what the Chinese says. Yeah, I won't try to locate it. Okay, then we have what is the result of sensual pleasure? And this is a little sort of, maybe a little bit needs some explanation. So it's really, we could say, the result of sensual desire. And so it says that one produces, I'm reading first the English, one produces an individual existence that corresponds with whatever sense pleasures one desires, and which may be the consequence either of merit or demerit. We can look at the note here. The note probably refers to the commentary. Okay, so it says, yeah, the commentary is helpful here. So it says that one who desires celestial or heavenly sensual pleasures fulfills good conduct. So it might undertake precepts or practice generosity with the hope or aspiration to achieve a heavenly rebirth and to enjoy the pleasures of heaven. And for many who follow the theistic religions, that is their aspiration, to be born into heaven, hopefully to meet God and the saints in heaven, and to enjoy the pleasures of the heavens. So you have beautiful body, radiating light, and at least in the Pali tradition, the devas or gods enjoy celestial sensual pleasures. And if you fulfill good conduct, then you'll get to be reborn in the deva world. And that is called an individual existence, that is an embodied existence, that is the result of merit. So you gain merit by doing good deeds, and you're reborn in the heavenly world. But somebody, say a human being, desires to indulge in sensual pleasures in this world. Maybe they don't believe in any afterlife, or they're not concerned with the afterlife, or they have ways of justifying their moral transgressions. So if you perform sacrifices, you get reborn in heaven, that's the belief. And so they perform animal sacrifices. Or they can just become robbers, adulterers, murderers, just to gain sensual pleasures in this life. And the result is that they'll be reborn in one of the realms of misery, the hell realm if it's really serious transgressions, or in the animal realm, or in the realm of the pretas, the afflicted spirits. So that is said to be the consequence of demerit. So we could say that such a variety of the different realms of existence really stem from different ways of pursuing sensual pleasures. When you reflect about it, you could see that this whole diversity of the kaleidoscope of samsara, the beings in the deva worlds, they're reborn there because they're seeking sensual pleasures through performing good deeds. We're reborn as human beings because we have sought the pleasures of the human realm by doing meritorious deeds, which were not as powerful as the merits that lead to the heavenly realms. And the animals, the pretas, and the beings in hell also probably had desires for sensual pleasures, but they engaged in misconduct, and so that's why they were reborn in the realm of misery. And so that is the result of sensual pleasures, or you could say the result of sensual desires. Okay, then we come to the cessation of sensual pleasures. And this I think I highlighted in my Pali version. Yeah, because I found it a little problematic. Maybe we can discuss a little bit. Okay, so what is the cessation of sensual pleasures? So the text says, with the cessation of contact, there is cessation of sensual pleasures. Yeah, I find that a little problematic. We could say, okay, if I'm enjoying, say, the pleasure of a beautiful piece of music, so first the ear is making contact with the music, and then maybe somebody turns off the radio or the concert comes to an end. So in that sense, there's no more contact, and so no more sensual pleasure is arising with regard to that particular performance of music. Or if I'm eating a delicious meal, so I'm eating one food after another, there's constant contact with different tastes, and so the sensual pleasures are arising. Let me take a little bit of that curry, a little bit of the the tofu preparation, the spinach, then the dessert, the fruits and the pastry, and top it off with a delicious cup of Ceylon tea. So there's constant changing contacts, and each one is generating its sensual pleasure. Meal comes to an end, contact is finished, and so we would say cessation of sensual pleasures. But this, in a way, it doesn't make sense to me, since the sensual desire is still there. If the Buddha says it's not the pleasant objects that are sensual pleasures, but it's the sankappa raga, the lustful or intention, the intention governed by lust. So the contact with the beautiful music, the delicious food comes to an end, but the intention, the desire, the craving is still there. So I have some trouble with this. What do you think?
It's
Maybe
the
let's talk,
latent tendency.
wait, let's take the last
sorry.
one. Okay, then, so what is the way leading to the cessation of sensual pleasures? So to terminate sensual pleasures, you have to terminate the condition for the sensual pleasures. That means you have to terminate contact. And so then the Noble Eightfold Path is the way leading to the cessation of sensual pleasures. And so the Eightfold Path, right view, we know it through right concentration. So that is the way leading to the cessation of sensual pleasures, because it leads to the cessation of contact. So maybe the only way to make sense of the cessation of contact is the means to the cessation of sensual pleasures is that as long as samsara continues, there is contact, and contact generates sensual pleasures. And so the Noble Eightfold Path is the way that leads out of samsara to the cessation of contact, and thereby to the cessation of sensual pleasures. So that's the way I would make sense of this, but maybe does anybody have any other ideas?
Yes, Bhante.
Somebody is speaking?
Yes, Bhante.
Oh, please.
I was thinking Adinava, Bhante, to see the danger with noble Aryan wisdom.
Wait,
To see the
wait, Jason is going to bring the earpiece. Oh, he's increasing the volume. Okay, that should be okay. Okay, go on.
Yes, Bhante, I'm thinking, my thought is Adinava, to see the danger of the sensual pleasures that keeps bringing us hooked to the cycle of samsara. So we need to see with noble Aryan wisdom, use Adinava to see that attachment is going to bring about suffering in the end.
Yeah, that's actually
Because
a very good point, and it just reminded me. Let me just see if I could get my memory accurate. Okay, this is in the Majjhima Nikaya, Sutta number 13, where the Buddha deals with 3 items. It's kamma, sensual desire. The second one is rupa, forms. And then as I think by there he means visible forms. And then the third is vedana, feelings. And under kamma, sensual desire, he explains that the escape from sensual desire, the escape would be equivalent to the cessation. He says it's, let me see if I could get it. I think it's kammanang chanda raga pahanang. Chandaraga vinayo, chandaraga pahanang. So what is the escape from kamma, from sensual desires? It is, or from sensual pleasures, it is the removal of desire and lust, the abandonment or the abandoning of desire and lust. Yeah, so the point you make is very good. So the way, if you take kamma in the sense of sensual desires or lustful intention, then seeing the adinava, that's the drawback, the danger, it would be the way to remove the sensual desire. Yeah, that makes better sense to me than contact. Okay, so but let's see some other ideas. So I think the next one would be Amy.
Yes, Bhante, thank you for the teaching. When I looked at the cessation of contact, there's the initial contact, that's whether with the eyes, ear, nose, but there's also the mind contact, I think. So even though there is no further contact with the eyes or the nose, there continues to be mind contact. And I think that may, at least in my mind, potentially sustain the desire, the intention.
Yeah, that is certainly very, very true. And in fact, when we look at this through the microscope, like using the Abhidhammic type of treatment, one would say that through the contact that occurs with the form through the eye, there's no sensual desire with that contact. With the hearing of the sound through the ear, in that consciousness, simply hearing the sound, there's no sensual desire. And similarly with the other three senses, but the sensual desire arises when the mano, that is the mind faculty, sort of contacts the sense object that has appeared through the senses. So it's really in the mind that the sensual desire arises, not in the sense faculty itself. Okay, I think, yeah, because your wall and the hand are almost the same color. This is Madeline, but I can't see the hand. Yeah, it's visible.
Oh, thank you, Bhante. I was just particularly interested in hearing about the sensual pleasure one gets from listening to beautiful music, and your point is when the concert goes off, the sensation of contact, there's a cessation of sensual pleasures. But I think from in the little verse that we read earlier, we have to remove the desire for it. That's how we can kind of wean ourselves off these contacts, these sensual contacts that bring us so much pleasure and we desire so much. I mean, thinking of myself, I love listening to music and I really like to hear certain sort of music. And I often think, what is this sensual desire and how do I stop it? It's very difficult. But I think here it's just remove the desire for them. But how do you do that?
Okay, well, I think what Gita said just a few minutes ago is the key for removing the sensual desire. So that is sort of examining the drawback or the danger. In Pali, the word is the adinava. So you see that when there is that attachment, that craving and attachment to the sensual pleasure, that becomes the bond that keeps us tied to sensual desires. And so when you examine and reflect on the drawback, even what seem to be innocent, relatively innocent sensual pleasures, and I have to admit, like even though I'm a monk, but I do like Mozart, Handel, Bach, that sort of great, beautiful music, but the attachment to that is a bond that keeps one sort of tied to the cycle of birth and death. And so when you reflect, I would say, on the drawbacks in samsara, that will help, and you realize that what maintains the continuity of samsara is the attachment to the sensual pleasures. that will sort of weaken and eventually lead to the removal of the sensual desire.
Yeah, so you just wean yourself off it gradually.
Yeah. But it's through the insight knowledge that it gets penetrated and eradicated.
Thank you. Thank you, Bhante.
And especially that the craving for the sensual pleasures within the Buddhist scheme gets eradicated only at the third stage of realization, the stage of non-returner. So as long as you, even if you become a stream enterer or a once returner, you can continue to enjoy Mozart.
I have a bit to go then.
Okay, I think there are some other hands. So I see, this is Kevin.
Thank you, Bhante. Thank you for teaching. I think people have done a good job of kind of filling in that gap of if kind of contact causes sensual pleasure, how do we get past that? And we realize now that it is the training. I think of the Satipatthana Sutta and the practices there of how we become mindful and see the body in a different way, see the body as something that is not to be desired. So that seems to me to be a practical lesson in how to get to that point of right mindfulness so that you can detach somewhat from those desires. And like Amy brought up, so much desire is in the mind. And I was a little confused why the mind was not mentioned much when we're talking about sensual pleasure in the sutta itself. I was kind of expecting within the sutta for the mind to be addressed, and even though we're talking about sensual pleasures, but like Amy said, so much of it is in the mind. So if we can train our perspective through Satipatthana practices and other practices, that helps to relieve the desire.
Yeah, it's that what's called in Pali the sankappa raga, that is the lustful intention, that is in the mind. You know, that's not in the sense organ itself, in the sense faculty, but that is in the mind faculty. So all of these sense objects, beautiful forms, sounds, odors, tastes, textures, sort of get channeled to the mind, and it's the mind that can respond to them either with craving and attachment or with detachment. And maybe this is where in many suttas where the Buddha is laying down the monastic training, we have the training called Indriya Samvara, the restraint of the sense faculties. And so the text goes something like, having seen a form with the eye, one does not grasp upon the general appearance and the details, since if one grasps upon the nimitta, the appearance, and the anubhyanjana, the details, then abhijja domanassa, that is craving and aversion, might flow in. And so to counter that, then one exercises restraint over the sense faculties. And so it's restraint over the sense faculties, which is at least temporarily sort of preventing the contact. The contact takes place, but it's that restraint that prevents the contact from turning into sensual craving, from lustful intention. Okay, next will be Yorong.
Yes, Bande, actually what you just said corresponds to what I'm about to say. My understanding is that the contact here refers to the contact associated with avijja. And because in the sequence of understanding or cognition, contact is the first one where avijja enters, because you have contact, and then you have attention, and then you have feeling, perception, volition, and then it's the craving and grasping.
Yeah.
And so the very first enter point, the avijja enters this cognition, sequence of cognition, is contact. And therefore, what Bande just said, if we exercise restraint at the point of contact, we prevent avijja from entering, then desire will not, or sensual pleasure will not occur. That's my understanding of this text.
Yeah, actually, that's a very good point. Yeah, that it's sort of when avijja was translated as ignorance. So when ignorance is sort of lying dormant or latent in the mind, then when there is contact, then that contact will trigger sensual pleasures in the sense of sensual craving. But if there's contact, but instead of sort of responding to the contact through ignorance, but if there's wise reflection, maybe you could say yoniso manasikara, then the sense object will not trigger the sensual craving, sensual desire. Okay, so next will be Samangi.
Yes, Bhante, thank you for your teaching. I have a question, kind of tangentially related. For example, what if there are no like kind of obsessions that are not really sensually based? For example, say a mathematician is obsessed with proving a theorem, or even cancer researchers say is really devoting their lives to something greater good, but it is not sensually driven. And where do you play? And of course, that I know a lot of people, they don't care about music or taste or looks or anything, but they are very
I didn't catch what you said. Just
so I know a lot of people, they don't so much care about taste or sound or looks or anything like that, but they are very much obsessed in a good deed.
yeah.
But it is prevent they are not striving in the Buddhist sense to I don't know. So where does, and it's not sensual, but it is in the mind, and it does take over in some sense, but in a good way.
Yeah.
Where is this kind of thing placed? It is not sensual. That is my kind of confusion.
Yeah, this part of the sutta is concerned only with sensual pleasures.
I see.
Maybe we could say that would come under, it might come under perception.
Okay.
And that perception will be taken up later in the sutta.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Concerned only with sensual pleasures. Okay, next will be V.
Yeah. Good morning, Bhante. I have a question not really related to, say, sensual pleasure, but it's more of a, in the Bahya Sutta, Buddha said that in what is seen, there will only be what is seen. In what is heard, there will only be what is heard. So could Bhante possibly explain, what is it, how did Bahya at that juncture, when he hear what the Buddha said, he realized he become Arahant?
Yeah, that's a rather sort of abstruse little passage, which requires like a lot of exploration or explanation, and there are different ways of explaining it. But just let us say that the first part of the Buddha's instruction to Bahya, in the seen, there should be only what is seen, in the heard, only what is heard, in what is experienced through the other senses, only what is sensed, in what is thought, or what is known, only what is known, what is cognized, only what is cognized. Yeah, in a way you could say that is stopping short at the bare object without elaborating upon the object in a way that will generate sensual desire. So you see the beautiful form. So actually this connects with the practice of restraint of the senses. So you see the beautiful form, but if you let the mind grasp upon the general appearance and then start looking at the details, that will trigger abhijja domanasang, craving and aversion. But if you just stop at the form, just it's a visible object, that's all, just something seen with the eye, then that won't trigger craving and aversion. You hear the beautiful sound, instead of grasping upon the beautiful qualities of it, you just register it as sound. You know, just in the herd, there is only the herd. So you're not grasping upon the general appearance, not looking into the details, and so there's no craving and aversion.
Yep. Okay. Thank you, Bhante. Right. Sadhu.
Okay, next will be Helen Rosen.
Yeah, I think you almost answered my question. For me, I'm just thinking about in day-to-day life, the difficulty of sorting through. I mean, it's not, desire is not the problem, it's clinging to desire that's the problem, I think, right?
Well, it depends on how one uses the word desire. So in day-to-day life, there are sort of naturally little desires that are necessary to function in day-to-day life. But what the Buddha's texts are dealing with is not that kind of, that is a simple desire to accomplish some aim. But what the Buddha's texts are sort of focusing on here is desire in the form of craving. Yeah, so we
Right.
make that distinction.
But how do you distinguish in day-to-day life? How do you distinguish between the craving and just enjoyment of pleasure? I mean, the Buddha wasn't saying not to enjoy, but not to cling to enjoyment, right?
It seems to me he's saying not to enjoy. But he says that there are sort of wholesome pleasures. He encourages one to enjoy those kind of pleasures. It depends, the Buddha's teaching is very much directed towards people in their specific situations and conditions. So when he's speaking to householders, he teaches them the ways to enjoy the pleasures of acquiring wealth, using that wealth to do good deeds, using the wealth to look after their family, to support to make gifts to their friends, to
But something like listening to music.
Yeah, in my opinion, as long as it's a kind of music that could sometimes, I say that certain types of music can help to elevate the mind and help to unfold the higher capacities of the mind. Again, I would put in this category maybe the music of Bach, Mozart, Handel.
Thank you, Bhante.
Yeah, whereas other kinds, I mean, I used to like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. I still admire the Rolling Stones. But that kind of music can sometimes generate unwholesome emotions. Taylor Swift, I don't know. She's a wonderful person. Okay, any other? I said, okay, we'll take one more question. So this will be Franz.
Oh, hi, Bhante. Related to the mention of Adinova as one way to deal with craving.
Your voice isn't coming through clearly. Try again.
Okay. In relation to I mentioned earlier of using Adinova to deal with craving. I was thinking of another way. Like it seems like Adinova is to intellectually think of the danger of craving for sensual objects like music or sight or movies and whatever. But isn't it another way to deal with it is more physical experience, and that is in meditation. When someone achieves even the first jhana, they already cut off the contact to the five senses so that they don't hear noise, they don't, even if you touch them, they don't react. And that is a direct comparison of the absence of sensual experience to what is a jhanic experience. And it is said, although I have no experience, that the pleasure of the jhana experience would overwhelm all the mundane sensual pleasure. So that would be another way to deal with craving, isn't
Yeah,
it?
that's a good point. That even if one hasn't attained the first jhana, but if when you're, excuse me, if you sort of, you're familiar with the passages in the texts about the jhanas, which speak about the piti and sukha of the jhanas as being far superior to that's the rapture and pleasure of the jhana as being far superior to the rapture, the delight and pleasure of the senses, then in aspiring to attain the jhana, then one will tend to relinquish the worldly sensual pleasures. And then even if one hasn't attained the jhanas, but one gains some deep experience of peace, joy, pleasure, bliss through the practice of meditation, one realizes and knows that that kind of pleasure is superior to the pleasure of sensual indulgence, and that it has to be gained through the relinquishment of sensual indulgence. There will be a motivation to relinquish the pleasures of the senses.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so this is, as I said, it's a complex sutta, so we're probably going to need several classes to get through it. And so we'll have to end for the day now. And so we will end with the sharing of the merits. So today is October 12th. Yeah, so we'll come back on October 19th and continue with the sutta. Yeah, I'll try to make available in some way for those who are interested that file in which I have the Pali and the Chinese version interwoven. Maybe it could be posted with the YouTube video. Okay, so we'll do the sharing of the merits. Akasa ta chabumata deva naga mahidika punyanta manumoditva chirang rakantu sasanang. Akasa ta chabumata deva naga mahidika punyanta manumoditva chirang rakantu desanam. Akasa ta chabumata deva naga mahidika punyanta manumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Dukkha patachani dukkha bhaya patachani bhaya soka patachani soka hantu sabe pipanino. And then we'll be doing 3 bows to the Buddha. And so here in the room, we're going to stand up and do the 3 bows. Okay, first bow. Second. Third. Okay, so thank you for joining.
And a bow to Bhante. Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Bhante.
Bhante. Have a nice Dhamma.
Thank you, Bhante.
Many merits.
Thank you, Bhante. Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you very much.
Everyone, Sarnai Bhante, be safe and well.
Thank you, Bhante.
We all love you, Bhante. Namo Buddhaya.
Thank you, Sadhu Bhante. Good night.
We all love you, Bhante. Take care.
Thank you, Bhante.
Have a good lunch, Bhante.
Okay.
And a good week.
Yes.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Everyone, Sarnai.
Thank you very much, Bhante.
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 Sadhu, sadhu.
Take care, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, so I'm going to end the session now.
Thank you, Bhante.